Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Leanne Kenny. I am the Member Engagement Lead at Nominet, and today we have an update on expired domains. So I'm joined by Nick Wember-Smith and Ellie Bradley. They are going to do a brief presentation just on sort of background and where we are now. And then it's over to you guys for questions and comments. So first thing, you'll have seen that we are recording the session. So we'll make that available on our Vimeo channel in the usual place for members. So please don't make any sort of personal recordings. There's no need. We're recording it and it will be published in that space that members are familiar with. I'm not going to do sort of a round table to introduce everyone just in the interest of time, because obviously we want to get through as much as we can. So if you have a question or you want to make a comment, if you could use the raise hand function, and then I can come to you and invite you to pop yourself on camera, take yourself off mute, and obviously interact in that way. And I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. But if you can use the raise hand, that will be great, because there's quite a lot of people on there, which is great to see. So I'm just going to try and do my best to keep an eye on everyone. So I'm not going to take up any more time on the format. If anybody's got any questions, obviously put them in the chat. I'm going to hand over to Ellie, who is going to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Leanne. So my name is Ellie Bradley, and as Leanne says, we're going to do a quick intro, provide a bit of context in terms of how we have kind of developed thinking around this area, some kind of insight into what we heard from the consultation itself, and a bit of an indication in terms of the direction of travel and what we're thinking, and obviously leaving lots of time for discussion and to talk through those ideas. We're really keen to hear your thoughts. There's a lot of things still to be determined, so it'd be great to get your feedback. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And the next one, thanks, Nick. Okay, so just in terms of the background, you're probably familiar, but we first consulted on this area around about this time last year. And at that stage, very much talking about the way in which we drop domains and wanted to get feedback and ideas on whether the way that we do it currently could be improved. And I think what we heard very much through that feedback was a general consensus that the current system was certainly open to improvements, and there was support from that first consultation around greater clarity and transparency and standardization in terms of the way that we do things for .uk domain names. And we heard that the majority of people who responded to the 2019 consultation were really in favour of drop lists. So certainly drop lists for registrars, very high in terms of the support for that, but also for the general public, a bit more transparency into the way that we do things if you're not part of the registrar channel, but actually someone who wants to purchase the name and a sort of end user. But we also heard feedback around other aspects of the system that people felt could be looked at and could be improved. So concern that because elements of the system are a bit opaque, you kind of need to be in the know, that felt like a closed system, and that potentially even within the registrar base, that actually only a small group really understood the kind of inner workings of how dropping domains works. We certainly heard about concerns about members and registrars working together to try to circumvent acceptable use policies and that sort of thing. And we heard suggestions for different release mechanisms. So really interesting in terms of the feedback, but I think also raising, it didn't kind of close down the questions, it actually raised a whole number of other questions that we felt warranted further consideration. So at the end of that consultation period last year, we said we'd come out with some further thoughts around how domains are released, and that was the consultation we held earlier this year. Next slide, thank you. So just in terms of the 2020 consultation and where we've got to in terms of our thinking, I think we're very much in agreement that clarity around when a domain will be released is a good thing. So for that to be publicly available, obviously questions remained about whether that would be on the kind of anniversary or the exact point in time when the domain had previously been registered. Is that when it should be released? Should we be releasing domains at a single point in time on any given day? So outstanding questions, but clarity that we really wanted to make that publicly available. We also felt, though, very much that as soon as you start to look into this system, actually it raises more questions. So we needed to look holistically at how we release expired names. And we knew that, or we felt that if we publish the date and time, then that would certainly reduce the incentive to create new memberships to gain DAC access, because the real-time DAC becomes, it's still relevant, but becomes less relevant once you've got that clarity of when a domain will be released. But equally, there are other aspects that then, or challenges that creates. So if we publish the date and time of a domain being released, it removes the incentive to create new memberships. But given that tags are free of charge and unlimited and available to anyone, the risk is you essentially, the kind of unintended consequence of that is you move sort of the desire to register multiple memberships into a desire to potentially register multiple tags, hundreds of tags even, to gain access to dropping names. And given this is a finite resource, and we're trying to make sure that the way we manage things is transparent and equal and fair, then we needed to think about other mechanisms for potentially limiting access to that finite resource. And thinking all the time about how we make sure that the load on systems is managed at a sort of relevant level. Obviously, we have very robust registration systems in place, but how do we make sure that they're not overloaded? And equally, how do we ensure that those registrars that don't engage in drop catching are not impacted negatively as a result of increased load in another part of the system? So recognizing that we're never going to reduce, kind of move away from interests in actually dropping domains, that people are going to really be interested in getting hold of these registrations, and they can have really high value, then how do we actually think about managing the resource effectively, and think about how that limited resource for registrations is allocated and used? So I'll hand over to Nick now, and he'll talk a bit about what we heard in the consultation.
Thank you, Ellie. So I'll take us on. Earlier this year, in the past year, we went through a second set of consultation questions. So I think some of these have already been shared, but we've got a bit more detail here because we had a lot of questions, obviously. So in terms of the feedback summary, we presented two options which we thought would, which would need to be chosen between in terms of the publication of an exact dropping point. So we didn't see that not having any changes in addition to having a publicly specific drop point would work. You needed to introduce, as Ellie explained, something else to make sure that there weren't any unintended consequences, or essentially just to shift the issues that we had been seeing from one place to another. So there's two options. I think everyone's pretty on this call is well familiar with the price auction. So it's an economic tiebreak, as it were, between different people who want the same highly contested domains, or that we would have a similar system to present, but that there would be an economic factor involved, so that you wouldn't just have hundreds of free tags. And I think those of us who are sort of thinking about these things, we did look at, well, maybe we should charge for all tags, but actually the general business as usual registration, which is the vast majority, 98% of all registrations, that's fine. So we don't want to change anything with that unnecessarily, but we did need to do something about these very highly contested registrations. So you can see the feedback here, with the economically controlled access model being the clear favorite. And I should say, in the way that we've done this, we want to come up with a solution which works for you, the users, because the number of people who participate in drop catching is quite small, and it's not really a very it's not applicable to most of the 2,500 registrars. So it's really important that we do this in partnership with you, and we want to do it with you in a way that shows that we're listening, so that we come up with solutions that actually you want and that you choose and that you will enjoy using. So for completeness here, we've also put here the no responses. So you can see that 12 respondents, which is 11%, didn't select either option. And you'll see that this is mostly because they basically said, we don't like either economically controlled access and we don't like auctions either. We don't want to pay anything more for access to dropping domains. But the point is, I don't think you can, we've thought about this, and this is not something that we're doing because we want to sort of raise more money or tax drop catching or regulate the market in any way. We just don't think you can have a publicly available time point for each registration unless you have something like economically controlled access or some sort of non-technical tie break, like a price auction. And we have thought very hard. And apart from just do better at what you're doing, no one really has come up with anything which makes us change that viewpoint. Oh, back to Ellie.
I think you just skipped a slide. Do you want to cover that, Nick?
I didn't mean to slip a slide. Yes, so that's my fat fingers. So yeah, sorry. And the second question was the second real difficult question, which we are undecided on, was whether it would be better for people if everything was dropped at the same point in time, like, sort of as we did for the ROR last year, 2 p.m. drop everything at one point in time and you can get on with the rest of your lives for the rest of the day. Or would you have it throughout the day, which might reduce system load, but then it means that you need to be more alert throughout the day about what you're doing in terms of dropping, I guess. So it's pretty much 50-50, but a slight preference for specified times throughout the day, as opposed to a single point in time. And some people basically not that bothered, provided there's a clear time point when a domain is going to be dropped. And essentially it's up to Nominet to choose something which is practical, simple to implement, and manageable in terms of system load. Would be fine. So it seems to be, yeah, and you can see it's fairly evenly split. Great, thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Nick. So what I wanted to do now is in a minute just talk through a bit more about our kind of direction of travel and the thinking that we've been doing. As we've said, really interested to hear views on that. Also, again, unintended consequences. We know that a lot of the people on this call are the absolute experts at this activity. So what we're trying to do all the time is not, if the system is imperfect at present, what we want to try to avoid doing very much is introducing other issues somewhere else in the system. So really keen to hear your views. And I think just to underline the point that Nick made, this, we have had and we do receive routine complaints where there's concern that different registrars are working together to gain greater access or to sort of get access to kind of finite resources and that sort of thing. With the best will in the world, it is incredibly difficult to prove that. And we've done a lot of work looking at registration patterns and transfers of registrations, post-registration, and it's really, really very, very difficult. So what we're trying to do is find alternative but still acceptable and kind of practical, pragmatic ways of dealing with the challenges that still mean that those that want to drop catch can do so and go about their business. So in terms of our thinking, where we are at present, if we just go on to the next slide, Nick, please. So lots of decisions still to be taken, but in terms of direction of travel, this is what we'd be really keen to get your thoughts on and feedback today. So the thinking is that that registrars that want to participate in drop catching will be able to essentially use their existing tag to do so, and will need to pay a fee to do that in order to register domains in the first 10 minutes post-release. And obviously we've done some analysis around when these desirable names are registered, and we think that first 10 minutes is sufficient. You would use your existing tag, you would gain an additional 4 connections. So you currently have 6 connections associated with a tag. For that £1,000 fee, you would have now 10 connections. It would be open only to registrars that are also members of Nominet. In terms of managing load on the systems, we're proposing that there would be, the registration commands would be restricted to 10 registration attempts per domain in a rolling period. And if that limit's exceeding, there would be some subsequent blocks placed on the tag. And thinking there is around a 24-hour block. Obviously, we'd want to give lots of clarity and notice around what's dropping and exactly when. So there'd be a list available, and hopefully that would help sort of manage thinking around which names people would want to go after. Once that first 10 minutes has passed, domains would be available to any registrar under the normal terms, and they'd be able to continue to register through EPP or WDM or however they might want to. So obviously not all registrations will be snapped up in those first 10 minutes. And our thinking at the moment is that we drop domains throughout the day. And I think that then puts less sort of single contention around a point in time, and consistent with more GTLDs. We know not consistent with all GTLDs, but we think that would be the most practical approach, both in terms of the high contention around registrations, but also more normal within the industry. So that's the thinking, and really we'd like to open it up and get some thoughts and feedback.
Thanks, Ellie. Sorry for the delay. Forgot to take myself off mute. Okay, so it's over to you guys. Who has got the first question? If you would like to raise your hand, I shall come to you and invite you to take yourself off mute. Who's going to be the first one? Any thoughts, feedback, questions about how it's going to work? This is your time to tell us what you think. So it's a really good opportunity to give us your feedback. I'm just looking for some raised hands. Okay, so we've got a raised hand from Edward. Edward, would you like to take yourself off mute?
Right, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Excellent. Is this using the same EPP system as for normal registrations, or will this be separate like with the ROR drop last year?
Great question. Who wants to take that?
I can't get myself off mute.
Yep, you're off.
Am I off mute? Sorry, yes. I apologise.
No, it's
okay.
Oh
dear, the catchphrase of lockdown. So the intention, it would be the same system.
Okay, right then.
Anyone else?
I did see, Leanne, that there was a comment
chat.
in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's a fair challenge, Rex. We are all the time trying to identify where. The question that was raised was around if we're raising the barriers to entry. This will presumably reduce the number of people participating. So will technical irregularities be dealt with effectively so that one of the participants doesn't win every time? So yeah, I mean, obviously we'll be looking all the time to identify where there are issues, and I think we don't anticipate that this is going to further concentrate, assuming that generally those that currently participate in drop catching want to continue to participate. It shouldn't further concentrate where those dropping names go ultimately. But I'm conscious we kind of constantly need to be on this, and constantly, where people do highlight issues, investigate those issues, and if we need to make changes to systems to address them. And equally, I guess, I think that's part of the point of today as well. I mean, if you see in this proposed approach, kind of additional risks or unintended consequences, like we've talked about a bit already, then we're really keen to understand those, recognising that there's a lot of expertise on this call.
Perfect, thanks Ellie. James Toplin, I see that you also have a question. Would you like to take yourself off mute?
Okay, so the question I've got is, why the increase in prices? So initially it was £600 plus VAT, now it's £1,000 per VAT. Why the increase in prices? That's one question. And another question I have is similar to the previous question. So there's actually 10 registration attempts per domain per 24 hours. So what kind of reassurances can Nominet give that they will kind of ensure that not a single person gets every single domain? Because it seems to be now moving towards pay to win, and there are certain registrars which do have the budgets there to literally just close all of the domain investors' businesses down by just literally getting 50 connections.
Thanks, James. Okay, so first question, increase in prices. Who wants to take that?
So I think the thinking at the moment around pricing is trying to get the balance right, so that we don't create an incentive to register additional memberships or find other, sort of trying to get the balance right across the different services and the fees that are charged. And we'll continue to think about what that price point should be. I think I know we talked about this a little on the call, the member engagement call yesterday, and this is absolutely not about raising money. It's about trying to find the right level that will be accessible, but equally avoid sort of those consequences elsewhere in the system. I'm very happy to kind of give assurances that in terms of any revenue raised from this, we would look to put that back into registrar related activities very specifically, and be very transparent around that. This is not about a money-making exercise. It's about trying to get the right kind of entry point to then balance across other systems. The point about kind of assurances, I mean, I think this is a kind of highly technical market, and some people are extremely good at programming and developing systems that are very effective at catching names. We need to make sure that our systems are robust, that acceptable use policies are effectively implemented, the actions taken where there are any breaches of those policies. But ultimately, it is a race condition, and it's the very nature of the system. What we're trying to do is, in all the ways that we can, find ways to make that as level a playing field and as fair as possible. One of the things we haven't reached a conclusion on is, can you buy more connections, or should we initially implement the system with the option for a registrar to have a single tag and a single batch of connections? Now, the challenge is, does that then create an incentive to register different memberships to get more connections, or will the fact that we're spreading or proposing to spread the release over the course of a day actually mean that there's less demand for those multiple connections? So, there's nothing to say we couldn't, when we do implement changes, do so in a measured way, and then if we identify that there are further challenges or issues, introduce something further down the line. So there could well be kind of compromise approach where we look at that as well.
Thanks, Ellie. So we've got a comment from Ian, who had already sent some feedback. So thank you for that, Ian. I'm just going to read out your comment. If you want to add anything to it, then obviously feel free to take yourself off mute and just add some comments. So Ian obviously is concerned about the same point, really. When you have drop catchers eavesdropping on DAC communications and packet changes, they will always be ahead of the rest, and then we all suffer further financial penalties. So obviously some continuing concern about how we can ensure that we do create that kind of level playing field that you've just mentioned, but also try and police that. in some way. Ian, if you want to add anything further, then feel free. So a comment from Cyprian: the barrier is too high. At £1,000 a year, I'm seriously disincentivized to take part in drop catching anymore. Drop catching is not a business for Cyprian. He's only catching a few domains in a year, and with this, he's pushed out. And then from Greg, so this is actually in reference to what we said in the consultation about what do you do with the money. So given that it's not for financial benefit to Nominet, will a percentage of the annual fee be going to charity as per the consultation rather than registrar related activities?
That's a good, I think it's undecided at the moment.
Yep.
And I guess my point is, it isn't about trying to raise money. It is, so we just got to get that balance right. We've got to get the fee at the right level. And I hear the point that's been made around where this isn't central to a registrar's business. Is the barrier too high? And equally, I think that, you know, do we put it back into support for registrars? Do we put it into a specific public benefit program? I guess my reflection would be there would never get consensus on what the right answer is to that. So I think I just want to be really clear that let's be really clear and transparent about where the money does go. And yeah, I mean, obviously it would be great to do public benefit work with it as well, but we can sort of work out the detail.
Thanks. So just a comment on sort of Cyprian's point about being pushed out of the drop catching market. Just a comment from somebody about it's not essentially stopping you from drop catching, but it is stopping you from drop catching the first 10 minutes. Not good for them. Obviously, that's quite an important distinction, that this tag gives you access to that first 10 minutes, but obviously that's only, I think, Nick, you probably know the statistic about how many names actually get caught within that first 10 minutes, because we've done the analysis on that. And then obviously the rest of the domains that are due to drop that day are available for anyone to register.
Yes, I'm trying to remember now. I think it was on average 30 domains a day are caught within a second, i.e. with the same timestamp. So it's those sort of between 30 and 50. It's not it's sort of slightly lumpy on some days. It's slightly higher, maybe up to close to 100, and other days much smaller. But it's on average about 30 domains a day where we think that high contention in the first 10 minutes of basically creating a more regulated registration process is required.
Okay.
Ellie, there was a question about DAC and eavesdropping and things. I mean, my question, well, a question which came to mind was, is Nominet going to continue providing real-time DAC? Because with an exact timestamp, what's the point?
Okay, thanks, Nick. Okay, we've got a question from Alan. What's the thinking for 10 attempts per domain? Surely only one is required, as the first will either succeed, domain available, or fail, domain not available.
Well, I think it's, yes, recognizing that, I mean, that becomes sort of the kind of digital archery type approach, where if you only have the one attempt. So we thought that gave a little bit more leeway, just really trying to be pragmatic about it.
Thanks, Ellie. Right, I'm going to come to Edward because he's got his hand raised, and then I'm going to come back to the chat. Edward, would you like to take yourself off mute?
With the fees that you're proposing, do you have a rough idea of how many members would be interested in paying this, and sort of what amount of money you'd be expecting to raise from that?
I'm trying to think in terms of the numbers when we've looked at it in the past. We haven't done the detailed analysis on that, and obviously very conscious that it will be a decision for any existing drop catcher to consider. But I think we're talking about tens of participants. This is not hundreds of participants, clearly, and so we're going to be talking in the order of a few tens of thousands of pounds certainly, not in excess of that.
Okay, so it's going to be a fairly small amount of money in Nominet's overall sort of income in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, I think from my understanding, I think probably, I mean, maybe as many as 200 people drop catch in terms of registrars, but some of those are very, very infrequent ones, and probably there's only really 50 very active drop catchers. So I'd have thought 50 maybe a very, depending on some of the very rich registrars may choose to take a drop catching tag even if they don't actually participate in drop catching. But I think maybe more likely around 50, maybe up to as many as 100. So as you say, in the consequence of Nominet's overall revenue, not very significant.
Okay, thank you.
There was just a question that's been in the chat, and I thought, and I think actually probably has already been answered by someone else on the call. But this question about why not just give every member access to a drop catching tag with the 10 connections, and then if you wanted to tier up from there, there would be a fee that goes with that. Then it's exactly as Rex has responded in the chat, that the issue is, we're thinking, or the concern with that is that we kind of maintain the current incentive to create memberships in order to get that access. So you kind of, and obviously there's a fee associated with that, but actually, is that a good thing where there's potentially a kind of sort of an incentive within the system to have multiple memberships? So it's always that question about, if you sort of tighten something up at one end, and then does it sort of squeeze out the other end of the toothpaste tube at the other end? How do we make this? How do we find something that addresses the current challenges in the best way possible? But we're very mindful that that's always a challenge if we don't sort of think through all the aspects.
And I think coming back to the point about why don't we just have an AUP of one transaction, and you should only need one. Yes, of course you only need one, but then as you say, we worried about the problem being shifted to an incentive to create parallel memberships, so you have multiple things. So with 10, that should be absolutely heaps of attempts to register. You only need one, but 10 should be a fairly good number. There shouldn't be any advantage of having more than 10, so there shouldn't be an incentive to create sort of dummy memberships and that sort of thing. And yes, and if you trip the system, then there will be automatic fail safes which will exclude you. Whether 24 hours is the right exclusion point or not, and whether people should be allowed to pay another £1,000 for another 10 connections is another point which I think would be interested to hear some views on.
So I'm just going to stay on that, because the next comment in the chat actually is from Aaron, about how we can guarantee that AUPs will actually be enforced. And if you can't guarantee that, aren't you just moving the goalposts? So I think, Nick, as you've just alluded to, hopefully the plan is to have some very strict things that trigger, and then we can enforce it in that way.
So the system logic will be, there's a pending delete list which has the domains which are going to be released and with a specific time point. And if you make more than 10 connection requests or 10 registration requests which are unsuccessful in relation to a domain on that list, then the system will lock you out automatically. So it doesn't require sort of compliance analysis and that sort of thing, whether 24 hours exclusion or whether it should be an escalated thing. So if you're repeatedly going over the limit, then maybe your connections are suspended for a month or something. I think that's sort of an interesting area, but we'll see, I think, how our experiences go and refine them as we go along. I think that's my kind of gut feeling on it, but yeah, interested to hear other people's views.
Great, thanks, Nick. Okay, so we've got a comment here from Leo Golan. So the comment is, you want to break the system when a few groups get most drops, but with this plan, he sees the situation will only get worse. The same people and groups will only consolidate their power using their financial and tech leverage, and most small players will just be swept from the game. Do either of you just want to comment on the possibility that actually this will just consolidate the market rather than, as opposed to trying to make it more transparent and fair?
I think I said earlier, there is it is ultimately a sort of a technology race. It is a race condition, and that it's obviously really important that we have a robust system. We have strong AUPs in place. They are effectively policed. All really important. But then ultimately, it is a race condition, and some people are very good at legitimately catching names. I think the only alternative to that is the auction, is something radically different, which we know was hugely unpopular. And so I think it's trying to find something that works within the existing system. But I absolutely agree that it needs to be robustly managed, and the system needs, we need to be really clear on how it works, and so that everybody understands that. But then ultimately, people will develop systems, and for a highly desirable name, will obviously go all out to register it. I think there's also been some quite interesting comments, sorry, just around the fee structure. Yep. And should that be should it be pay per connection? Should we have some kind of approach in terms of payment throughout the year, quarterly, monthly payments, those kind of things? So I think interesting ideas. I mean, as I say, we're really that's the kind of feedback we're really keen to understand and hear about.
Yeah, and if we don't actually get to air it in person, obviously we've got the chat, so we can review that after the call. James, I'm going to come to you because you've been waiting very patiently. If you'd like to take yourself off mute.
Okay, so it's a comment and also a question. In the UK ROR release, what we actually saw was a lot of people was sending requests early. So those on the £95,000 tier had the most connections. They could send all the requests early. So I actually see this, there is an incentive to get more connections. So it's not just a technology race. Those with the most amount of money will just use the 100 create requests for the same domain, and they've got 10 times more chance because they'll send all the requests early, and then they'll be the first in the line when the domains drop. The other kind of possible solution, I'm not sure if this one has been brought up in the past or not. At the moment, you're suggesting that the domains drop at a set time, and it's all down to the technology who gets the domain name. Why not just release the domain at a set time, and then whoever's interested in the domain, the winner is picked at random? Then that way, the smaller registrars have the same amount of chance as the larger registrars, and it's not just based on how much you can afford to pay and the technology. Everyone's got the equal chance.
Thanks, James. Nick, do you want to so interesting point about the sort of perception that people with who can buy more connections can kind of waste some of those create requests to put it in early. So yeah. Thanks for that. That's obviously one of the unintended consequences that you guys potentially know all about, and it's really helpful to raise that. So we'll definitely feed that back.
I think that's why there's a limit on the number of unsuccessful create requests that you'd have, and the limit's not 1, the limit's 10, to take that into account.
So the two work together. So actually, what happens if you put in a number of unsuccessful create requests? Do you get locked out? Is that the plan?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So potentially, you're actually doing yourself a disservice if you adopt that strategy of putting the requests in early.
So, and just on the question that's just come in, the restriction was, the thinking at the moment is the restriction is on domain commands per tag. Do you want also the other point that James raised was around effectively a lottery system?
Yeah.
I don't want to. I know we've sort of talked about this too quite a lot as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so lottery system was suggested actually as part of the consultation feedback, I think, in 2019, and there's significant issues with the lottery system in the sense that you need to be registered to have a lottery system. The risk of running an illegal lottery without license was something which was unattractive, and as far as I'm aware, if you think about what happens in other TLDs, I can't think of a single example of a lottery being used, and there's probably a good reason for that.
Okay, thanks. We've just got some more comments about the limits and whether people will be they'll be disincentivized, to create more memberships. So in terms of the AUP and the number of create requests and being cut off if you have unsuccessful create requests, if you're paying for 10 memberships, actually you've got 100. So potentially you can spread the risk across those 10 memberships in the same way that potentially people are trying to do now. So how, I suppose one of the things to think about is, does this proposal actually stop or prevent that from happening, from the people taking out multiple memberships? Because, I guess at some point we might be in the same situation now where we're having to try and link memberships together in order for the AUP to go across all of those memberships. So that's definitely one to think about. I know that we mentioned payment, but we had a specific question on that, so I'm just going to try and find it in the chat because there's quite a lot. Okay, it was from Andrew. Will you allow smaller registrars to pay monthly a subscription, the £1,000 per year, for example, £83 per month?
Sorry, Leanne, it took a while to come off
That's all right.
mute then. So yeah, I suppose I was kind of picked up on that a little bit earlier,
Yep.
but I think that's interesting. We haven't made a decision, so I'm not going to say yes or no at this stage, but I think different approaches in terms of, is 10 the right number? Is the £1,000 the right fee? And how does payment work for that are all to be considered. But I think, it's good feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I think, if you're running a business, and essentially being a Nominet registrar is running a business, this is not like a sort of a hobby. I know it is sort of some people have it as a sort of a hobby, but essentially this is a professional activity, and I think £1,000 a year is a very small amount for a business to pay for systems access of this nature. When you consider the sophistication, time and effort and maintenance that's required from Nominet's side to provide it. So I just don't really want people sort of dropping in and out when they see there's 1 month there's a particularly good name they want to have, and then pay for a month and try and pick it up, and then not. I want this to be, I think, a more sort of sustainable business model for the people concerned.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So there's definitely some discussion around whether what we've proposed is going to prevent or try and address some of that collusion aspect. So Andrew's comment is, you need to allow for network latency in terms of cutting off. A domain may drop at 13.0001. However, you need to send your request slightly before that, maybe at 13.0000. So the more requests you have, the more you can scattergun the drop time. And Aaron is agreeing with that. He's saying it actually really only changes the goalposts, and we'll all be in the same place from day one. Another comment from Cyprian, I think we'll always have fake memberships. People will always try that route, even if it doesn't necessarily increase chances. So it's probably better to accept this fact and focus on how to make things fairer. And Lee's comment is, it's a good start to the discussion, but this needs a lot more thought still. Nothing here solves the big pockets, buying more attempts, as many messages above say. So clearly some concern about whether or not that will actually solve the collusion issue that we potentially have at the moment. Edward, I am going to invite you to take yourself off mute and join the conversation.
Right. So, will the 10 registration attempts per domain only apply to those who are signed up to the drop catching service? So we're a retail registrar, we won't be signed up to it. It's not something that we do. What I want to make sure is that we don't get our registration systems knocked off for 24 hours because some customer tries to hammer through our, our web front end. You can buy a domain, pay for it. If they go and hammer a domain that's dropping, that we get blocked from registering any domains for 24 hours because someone used our automated systems to do something like that.
No, thanks, Edward. No, this is just for domains which are on that pending delete list, and the whole point about this is it's a specific intervention for dropping domains and not really to make any changes to the existing practices for business as usual registration, which seems to be really good, and we don't want to make any changes to that. So yeah, we'd not penalize, or this would just apply to those domains which are on that list in the first 10 minutes.
But what I meant with that is if someone tries to register one of those dropping domains through our registration systems during the drop period,
they won't be able to unless you've got yourself a drop catching tag.
Okay, yeah. So if we don't sign up for the tag, nothing changes for us.
Exactly.
Accidentally get locked out. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So from Ian, sorry. Law of averages, no single tag can catch as many domains as we've seen in the last few months. If these individuals are outsmarting Nominet's technical team day in, day out, how will this be any different? Quite a difficult question to answer, but I don't know whether either of you want to add anything else to what we've already said. And it's fine if not.
I mean, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating of it, I guess. I mean, the point about this is it is supposed to level the playing field, to make it more transparent, more fair, and to have this a system with which you, the drop catchers, are happier than you are at present. And that's why we're doing it. And I guess we reserve the right to reverse any changes we make if we don't see that they're producing the required effect. So that's something we would always take some feedback and listen and watch carefully to. And sorry, Cyprian, I saw you had a question around time frame. I don't know whether that's one for you, Ellie.
So what sort of time frame are we thinking?
So we haven't got a fixed date at this stage. There's still, as you can see, questions that need addressing and decisions to be taken. Once we've got to a sort of final recommendation, it would then be part of our roadmap and the ongoing development work around, the UK registry. We'd give you lots of notice, I think, is the main thing to say. So we'd be looking at implementing this next year, but we'll come back to you in terms of timeframes.
Thank you. Right, just a little time check. We've just got over a little bit over 10 minutes. So I'm going to carry on going through what we've got in the chat. But obviously, if you do have any questions or further comments, now is the time to get them in. So either raise your hand or pop them in the chat. So from a question from Greg, can Nominet more effectively police AUP across multiple memberships with the setup? So I think it means the proposal now versus the current setup.
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, supposing you've got two people who are drop catchers and they happen to be brothers, should we pool them for the sake of connections, or are we saying they're acting in constant collusion? By introducing the economic access, well, we say, well, it doesn't really matter if they're related or not. They both have the same £1,000 a year payment, or they could have two £1,000 payments with one of the brothers, and you end up in the same place. And so it's supposed to remove the whole collusion aspect from this. So that's what it says, it's an economic access as opposed to pooled memberships and things. So it's not supposed to be something. Therefore, we don't need to go into the, oh well, those registrars are friends with each other and they will work in concert. That's supposed to take that off the table entirely. That's the whole point.
Okay, thank you. So question from Andrew. If you have a drop time per domain, each domain that drops, even rubbish ones, will be delayed by 10 minutes. How is a drop list with a drop time therefore useful to registrants wishing to hand register names at a public register? So I think he's referring to sort of these domains that are dropping within the first 10 minutes.
So I suppose, I mean, the point is that if you're registering a domain and you'll see it's available for that 10-minute period, but you won't be able to register it, I guess is the point. Well, I suppose that's why we've kept that period as short as possible, to try to eliminate this period of high contention from business as usual registrations. And I think, well, we'll see, but I'd be surprised if there's very many registration attempts made by an end user in that 10-minute period, causing confusion and lack of success. But that's why it's the pending delete and the exact timestamp and the 10-minute rule is going to be public, so that anybody who wants to see that can see that for themselves if they're so minded to. So they should know that unless they go to a specific drop catching registrar, they'll have to hand register it through their own registrar in the usual process after 10 minutes of availability, if it's still there.
Okay, so that would be so the intention is to display that in terms of availability 10 minutes after. Okay.
Can I ask a question of clarification? I know James has said, and I know, sorry, Rex is also has a question, but James has said the issue is with our terms and conditions. And I'd just be really interested, either on the chat or for him to come in and just explain what he thinks needs to change in the T's and C's.
Yeah, I'm happy to explain it. Like when there has been issues before with Nominet members, I appreciate you stating that sometimes it's very difficult to prove collusion. However, in some cases, it's very clear something is going on. And it's just in the Nominet terms and conditions, it's very unclear what happens if people are found to break these terms and conditions. There's no actual clear definition what happens, what even's happened to people in the past. Like when kind of there are issues, the feedback is very much, I don't know, we're dealing with it or something like that. But that's all fair and good. But if the answer is just we're dealing with it, how is this going to dissuade other people from gaming the system if there isn't a statement made by Nominet as to what happens to these people if collusion and gaming of the system is found?
I think, yeah, this is a tricky one in terms of, obviously, it's almost a naming and shaming, which we're reluctant to do, and obviously go into detail about action that's been taken against a specific registrar, because that's obviously between Nominet and a registrar. Yeah. But I take your point that from a transparency perspective, you guys are sort of reporting these and making these complaints, and then there's a disconnect between us saying
what happens
leave
next.
it with us, and then actually what the outcome of that is.
And we have spent, I mean, just on that, they don't go into a black hole. We do look into them. It is very hard. And I know, I mean, I've said this, so I won't go on about it, but it is really difficult to prove unequivocally, because the very nature of this is that lots of people are going after the same registration at a given point. So if that's 3 members colluding, going after the same registration at a given point, then it's really hard to see those patterns, and it is not through lack of investigation and trying. But I take the point, very clearly made, that with any change, let's make sure that acceptable use policies and the action that's taken where those are breached are really clearly defined, and yeah, let's make sure we if we need to improve in terms of the level of feedback we're providing in response to when issues are raised, then we can absolutely look at that.
Yeah, I just think it needs to be clearer. So it's actually in the terms and conditions. First breach, this happens. Second breach, that happens. Third breach, that's the end of it, kind of thing. So yeah, without clear kind of terms and conditions as to the repercussions of this, it's just going to continue, basically. So you don't need to name and shame the particular registrar. You just need to make it clear in terms and conditions what happens.
Yep.
I think that point about escalating sanctions is well made, James. And just to reiterate, Ellie, we looked through the log files, and it's not as if there's sort of 3 or 4 registrars obviously are targeting a particular domain. If it's a desirable domain, there's 50, 60, 100 registrars all targeting it. It makes it very difficult to see kind of whether there's anything untoward going on in terms of access to DAC being inappropriately shared and breach of the system limit. So just seeing that Ian is saying that there's a proposal is a bad idea, and we should revert to the ROR drop. I mean, for those of us who've worked at Nominet for some years, you'll know that running a registry is not necessarily a popularity contest. And I do remember quite a lot of complaints about the ROR process. So, but if that's genuinely the consensus, because I think in the initial consultation there was, whatever you do, don't do the ROR. Almost anything is better than that. So if Ian's sort of go to ROR point is actually something which has support amongst you, the users of drop catching and the drop catchers in the market, if that's something you would prefer as opposed to something like this or something like an auction, then that's not something that's come through in any of the feedback that we've had to date. But tell me if I've heard that wrong.
Thanks, Nick. Right, I'm coming to Rex. Thank you for waiting, Rex. If you'd like to take yourself off mute.
Thank you, Leanne. Hopefully I can remember what I was going to say now. I was going to say, Nick, you sort of said other people aren't doing this. Is anyone doing a £1,000 to pay-to-play arrangement? Because I thought the suggestion of an auction was definitely worth considering, actually. I did feel that it would might be popular amongst the small drop catchers. I wouldn't say necessarily small in what they do, how they do it, but I mean certainly the £1,000 is going to be pretty off-putting to many.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rex, and
obviously, and indeed this ROR suggestion that's just come in as well.
Yeah. Thanks.
I think that maybe this new figure of 1,000 has caught a few people by surprise a bit, and it has sort of, that may be a bar that is a bit too high, and it does sound like from what you said earlier that you're not prepared, that is, in your view, a fair amount of money to charge. But I think that seems to be a fair bit of pushback on that. So yeah. I just wondered if, going back to my first question, is this a standardized, is this a common thing?
Okay.
Doing that?
No, thanks. Thanks.
If it isn't, then you shouldn't really be saying that no one else is doing auctions, so that's why we won't consider it.
That's
it should be considered, I think, on its own merits, and if there are legal barriers to overcome, then well, luckily we have you as a lawyer to deal with.
Thanks, Rex, and thank you for. I really appreciate the thoughtful and constructive way you put that around. So thank you actually to everybody for the really positive and civil way which the questions have been put, and we really appreciate that because it makes us. It helps us to help you basically and come up with a good solution. So in answer to your question, obviously we did think that there was some merit in auctions because that's why we considered it as the consultation alternative to economic access. And you can see the results of the survey. It's very clear that it's extremely unpopular amongst the users, and particularly I guess I can leave you and Andrew to debate offline the merits and demerits of the various approaches, but you can see that the feedback is conclusive that auctions was not popular. In answer to your question about access to domains, I certainly know that the Canadians have access to, they have, is it $1,000 Canadian for a specific drop catching tag. I don't know exactly whether it's the 10-minute thing. I think ours would be a sort of a narrower pool. I think for them it's a sort of first day of registration.
And to be clear, that's additional. That's an additional access point. So there is some access provided, but they have very different barriers to entry in the first place and things like that. So it's, I think the part of the challenge is, I don't want to suggest that they've got the same approach, but you can buy additional access.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we all really love about Nominet is the fact that it's such an open process to become a registrar. You know, it actually costs zero to become a registrar, and that's pretty much unheard of. You know, if you're in the GTLD market, you need to go through ICANN accreditation, which is itself a very expensive process. You know, Nominet membership, okay, the joining fees is £400, but after that, it's only £100 a year. So I guess when it comes back to the sort of the level of 1,000, well, if you can pay 400 joining and 100 membership, that's £500. So we did think that that definitely would be the floor above which you would need to charge for access in order to disincentivize multiple memberships. So that was the sort of logic there. I mean, we had a number of different feedbacks in the consultation when we talked about 6 connections and £600, and actually on balance there was quite a lot of weight for actually that's still too cheap. You need to be more expensive. So I've come up with 10 connections for 1,000. Might not be the right ultimate answer, but it's what we've put out here because we want to have something specific for you guys to debate.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So I've got David Forster raised his hand and he's not contributed yet. So I'm going to come to David. Then I've got a last question from Andrew because I'm conscious of time. Any other comments that have been made in the chat? Obviously, we'll have a copy of that so we can take that away. But just to clarify, Nick, that Rex was actually talking about the lottery idea rather than the auction idea. So whether there's merit actually to considering that sort of a random allocation of a domain to somebody. So I'm just going to leave that with you. I don't think you need to answer that particularly because you talked about the lottery, but it was more about just, you know, anybody else do that, and is it worth giving it some more thought? I'm going to come to David. David, would you like to take yourself off mute?
Thanks, Leanne. So it's just a question from a slightly different angle. Can I ask if Nominet has done any research or study into how this is going to impact the end users, the people that are going to use the domains on a daily basis? Is it going to change the premium pricing for them? Is there going to be more domains fall through the drop catching process, or maybe less, because actually to recoup the costs, there might be a little bit more opportunistic registering? I'm not on about the really high premium ones. They're always going to be found. I'm on about where that level is going to change, well, that bar is going to move in one direction or the other. So
that's a fantastic question, David. And I think actually, obviously, in terms of the systems and tools we provide, they need to be fit for purpose and they need to work for the drop catching market and the drop catching segment of the registrar base. But actually, taking a more holistic step back, look at, you know, running UK responsibly for the whole of UK community. I think that's what I'm really interested in is actually, does this improve access and transparency to domains or not? And I suppose that's one of the sort of reasons why perhaps I was a bit hesitant about auctions, because it wasn't really proven to me that actually that just wouldn't drive up the price to the end registrants as opposed to some other alternative. And I think that's probably the acid test, is does this improve access and real use of domains for the benefit of the whole namespace? And we believe, I suppose, this is the best way to do that, but it's really important consideration. And I think it's easy to get sort of down in the weeds of, you know, AUPs in 10 minutes, this and 10 unsuccessfuls. But actually the real test is this right for the whole namespace as a whole? That's why we really didn't want to interfere too much with business as usual registration, because that's 99% of business anyway.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, the last question is for you as well, I think. So the question is from Andrew. Will you publish these proposals online with a consultation summary for members to make feedback?
I think we will obviously publish this recording, and we want to continue the discussion. I don't think this is the end of the process, but hopefully it's the beginning of a clearer picture as to where we think we've ended up. We've already had 2 consultations, so I don't really think we're going to go out and have another sort of public consultation as such, but as you know, we are always available and listening for feedback. Thanks very much, Cyprian, for your comment about the sort of healthy debate. I've seen lots of more questions around shortlist. I guess I don't know. Well, my impression is I don't think that the industry particularly wants to make this sort of a match of the day sort of entry question, and then have a sort of a lottery processes between the different things, and whether that inadvertently could also cause an incentive to create parallel memberships, because it ends up back in the same thing. But anyway, lots to think about, and huge thanks for everybody's really positive and constructive participation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for me. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to wrap it up, but just a couple of points. Thanks very much for everybody for their comments and questions. I think that's been really, really useful. If you do have feedback, I'm very happy to take it. So yes, please do send it through to engagement@nominet.uk, and I can happily pass it on to the right people. And in terms of video, this has been recorded. We will make it available on our Vimeo channel. And if you want the password to that, it's the same address, engagement@nominet.uk. So we will make sure that we review all the comments on the chat, and they can be fed into the process as well. But yeah, thanks very much for all of your comments and questions, and for taking the time to join us today. Hope it's been useful, and we will keep in touch with further developments.
Thank you very much.
Can you please share the password here? We're all registrars here. Yeah, everybody's a member, so it's a very complicated one, Nominet member engagement. So that's the password for the Vimeo channel. But if anyone didn't get it, then drop me an email. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Hope to see you soon.